The Law of the Sea. Introductions to the Law of the Sea. Historical developments of the Law of the Sea. Key concepts and maritime zones. Maritime delimitations. Baselines and bay closing lines. Islands and rocks. Enclosed or semi-enclosed seas. Flag state jurisdictions and exceptions. Conclusions. Introductions. The law of the sea is a complex and evolving area of international law that governs the rights and responsibilities of nations with respect to their use of the world's oceans. It will cover historical development, key concepts, the legal frameworks that shape the contemporary understanding of maritime law. The evolutions of the law of the sea has been characterized by persistent competitions and contestations among states regarding access to and control over various maritime areas. This ongoing rivalry has been the primary driving force behind the development of international law of the sea, with states' attitudes towards oceanic spaces continuously evolving over time. The international community has made significant efforts to codify the law of the sea through various United Nations conferences. These conferences culminated in the adoptions of the 1982 United Nations Conventions on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, which serves as the cornerstone of modern law of the sea. The negotiation process for UNCLOS was notably protracted due to the interrelated nature of many issues. States often employed a package deal approach, whereby support for one proposal was contingent upon reciprocal support for another proposal on a different issue. It is worth noting that some Western states initially hesitated to sign or ratify the 1982 UNCLOS due to concerns over certain provisions in Part 11, which pertain to the exploitations of the deep seabed. This impasse was eventually resolved through the adoptions of the 1994 agreement relating to the implementations of Part 11 of the conventions. The key concepts and maritime zones. The law of the sea establishes various maritime zones, each with its own legal regime. These are territorial sea, contiguous zone, exclusive economic zone, EEZ, continental shelf, high seas, territorial sea. The territorial sea extends up to 12 nautical miles from the baselines of a coastal state. Within this zone, the coastal state exercises sovereignty subject to the right of innocent passage for foreign vessels. The contiguous zone extends up to 24 nautical miles from the baseline. In this area, the coastal state may exercise control necessary to prevent and punish infringements of its customs, fiscal, immigrations, or sanitary laws, and regulations within its territory or territorial sea. The EEZ extends up to 200 nautical miles from the baseline. Within this zone, the coastal state has sovereign rights for exploring, exploiting, conserving, and managing natural resources, as well as jurisdictions over certain activities. The continental shelf comprises the seabed and subsoil of the submarine areas that extend beyond the territorial sea throughout the natural prolongations of the land territory. It may extend beyond 200 nautical miles from the baseline in certain circumstances. While the high seas encompass all parts of the sea that are not included in the EEZ, Territorial sea or internal waters of a state. They are open to all states for purposes such as navigations, fishing, overflight, and submarine activities. Maritime delimitation refers to the process of establishing boundaries between maritime zones of different states. This complex area of law involves various principles and methods. Under Articles 15, 74, and 83 of UNCLOS, it provides rules for delimiting the territorial sea, EEZ, and continental shelf, respectively. Some of the key principles, such as equidistance median line, which mean a line every point of which is equidistance from the nearest points on the baselines of two states. Equitable principles, achieving an equitable solution is based on relevant circumstances. Some case law, such as maritime delimitations in the area between Greenland and Jane Mayen, Denmark versus Norway in 1993, which apply both equidistance and relevant circumstances. Maritime delimitations in the Black Sea, Romania versus Ukraine 2009, establish a three-stage approach to maritime delimitations. Articles 5 until 14 of UNCLOS provide rules for determining baselines. Article 10 of UNCLOS specifically addresses bay closing lines. The case of fisheries case between United Kingdom versus Norway, 1951, it established the validity of strait baselines in certain geographical circumstances. With regards to islands and rocks, the legal status of islands and rocks can significantly impact maritime zone claims and delimitations. Article 121 of UNCLOS defines islands and their entitlement to maritime zones. Article 121, Clause 3 of UNCLOS addresses specific case of rocks. South China Sea arbitrations between Philippines and China 2016 provided interpretations of Article 121 3 regarding rocks and the maritime entitlements. UNCLOS recognizes the concept of enclosed or semi-enclosed, which are surrounded by two or more states and connected to another sea or the ocean by a narrow outlet. This is as provided under Article 122 of UNCLOS, which provides the definitions of enclosed or semi-enclosed seas. Article 123 of UNCLOS, which outlines cooperation duties for states bordering such seas. The general rule with regard to flag state jurisdiction is that ships on the high seas are subject to the exclusive jurisdiction of the flag state. However, there are certain exemptions to this principle. Under Article 91 until 92 of UNCLOS, it addresses nationality of ships and the status of ships. Article 99 until 111 of UNCLOS provide for exceptions to exclusive flag state jurisdiction. Some of the exceptions are the hot pursuit, coastal states' right to pursue foreign ship that has violated its domestic laws, right of visit, warships may board foreign merchant vessels suspected to certain activities. Piracy, universal jurisdictions applies to acts of piracy on the high seas. Slave trade. Ships engaged in the slave trade may be seized by any state. Unauthorized broadcasting. States may exercise jurisdictions over ships engaged in unauthorized broadcasting. Stateless vessels. Ships without nationality may be boarded and inspected by any state. The case law is MV Saiga number 2 between St. Vincent's and Grenadines versus Guinea, 1999, which addressed issues of hot pursuit, and the use of force in maritime law enforcement. UNCLOS is often referred to as the constitutions of oceans, providing a comprehensive system for maritime zones. Early concepts allow states to agree on territorial waters and jurisdictions. The UNCLOS operates by agreement and has exclusive rules. Pre-UNCLOS concepts like fishery zones were implemented by state agreements. Historic rights can exist but may conflict with UNCLOS. Land ownership depends on territorial title, while sea spaces title derives from UNCLOS. Coastal state status is crucial for maritime claims. The principle "land dominates the sea" informs maritime boundaries. Islands have full maritime entitlements, while rocks have limited entitlements. Low tide elevations are not territory, but have territorial sea rights. The sovereignty of coastal states extends to internal waters, which include ports, harbors, rivers, lakes, and canals. Article 8.1 of UNCLOS defines internal waters as the waters on the landward side of the baseline from which the width of the territorial sea is measured. A coastal state is entitled to prohibit entry into its port by foreign ships, except for ships in distress, which means they are seeking refuge from a storm or severely damaged at sea. The jurisdiction of the coastal state's court is not exclusive. The courts of the flag state may also try people for crimes committed on board the ship. The coastal state will not interfere with the exercise of disciplinary powers by captain over his crew. The coastal state has sovereignty over its territorial sea, including exclusive rights to fish, exploit resources, and regulate navigations. They can arrest merchant ships and require non-compliant warships to leave. In Mauritius versus UK, the UK was obliged to ensure fishing rights for Mauritius. In this case, the arbitral tribunal concluded that the United Kingdom's undertaking regarding the fishing rights of Mauritius was legally binding, obliging the United Kingdom to ensure that fishing rights remain available to Mauritius. Foreign ships, including warships, have a right of innocent passage through the territorial sea. Regulations vary, with some countries requiring permissions. Passage must not harm peace or security. Coastal states must not obstruct innocent passage, but can prevent non-innocent passage. Straits and archipelagic waters have their own specific rules. The width of the territorial sea has evolved from the cannon shot rule in 18th century to the 12-mile limit established by the 1982 convention. Conflicting fishing interests and concerns of major maritime powers influence these changes. Under Article 3 of the 1982 Conventions, the UNCLOS, it provides that every state has the right to establish the breadth of its territorial sea up to a limit not exceeding 12 nautical miles. Since the adoptions, states have largely respected the 12-mile limit. The United States extended its territorial sea to 12 miles in 1988 and recognized the claims of other states up to a maximum of 12 miles since President Reagan's Ocean Policy Statement of March 10, 1983. The measurement of the territorial sea is based on baselines. Typically, the low water line, low tide elevations, and straight baselines are also used under certain conditions. Bays have specific regulations, including a maximum baseline length of 24 miles, with historic bays claimed by special historic rights. Bays are regulated by Article 10 of the 1982 conventions. Historically, it has been a custom to draw straight baselines across the mouth of a bay and measure the width of the territorial sea from such lines. However, there was controversy about the maximum permissible length of such lines. The Geneva Conference set a maximum length of 24 miles, which is being repeated in Article 10 of the UNCLOS. At various times, different states have claimed limited rights in areas of the high seas adjacent to the territorial seas, or have claimed different width of territorial sea for different purposes. Between the two world wars, the French writer Jodl proposed the theory of the contiguous zone to rationalize the conflicting practices of states. Under Article 33, Clause 2 of UNCLOS, it provides that the contiguous zone may not extend beyond 24 nautical miles from the baselines from which the breadth of the territorial sea is measured. Since 1960, states have claimed exclusive fishery zones beyond territorial sea. UNCLOS the third approved a 12-mile territorial sea, the current UNCLOS, and 200-mile exclusive economic zone EEZ. Coastal states have sovereign rights over resources in their EEZs. States often make treaties allowing other states to fish in their EEZs in exchange for benefits. Foreign states have freedom of navigation and overflight in their EEZ. Before 1945, states could freely exploit the high seas seabed. In 1945 and onwards, the United States claimed exclusive rights to its continental shelf, leading to an establishment of a new customary international law. The 1982 Conventions UNCLOS defines the continental shelf and grants coastal states exclusive rights to explore and exploit resources. Article 76, 1 of the UNCLOS provides that the continental shelf of a coastal state comprises the seabed and subsoil of the submarine areas that extend beyond its territorial sea throughout the natural prolongations of its land territory to the outer edge of the continental margin or to a distance of 200 nautical miles from the baselines from which the breadth of the territorial sea is measured, where the outer edge of the continental margin does not extend up to that distance. The continental margin consists of continental shelf, continental slope, and the continental rise. Maritime boundaries are governed by various conventions and cases. Articles 15 and 24 of the 1982 conventions and 1958 conventions set rules for territorial seas and contiguous zones. Article 6 of the 1958 Continental Shelf Conventions emphasize equitable delimitations. Special circumstances, however, may justify deviations from these equitable delimitations. In the North Sea Continental Shelf case, the International Court of Justice held that the rules in Article 6, Clause 2 of the Continental Shelf Conventions were not part of customary law and were therefore not binding on West Germany, a non-party to the conventions. Instead, the court stated that the relevant rule of customary law required the parties, West Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands, to negotiate in good faith to reach an agreement on equitable delimitations. However, There is an arbitral award in United Kingdom and France concerning the delimitations of the continental shelf in the English Channel, suggests that the difference between customary law and Article 6 is rather slight. The arbitrators held that the positions of the Channel Islands and the Isles of Scilly constituted special circumstances within the meaning of Article 6 of the Conventions, and the boundary should be based on equitable considerations, departing from the median equidistance line where such special circumstances existed. The entitlement to a maritime space involves delimitations, which presupposes overlapping entitlements. The first step is to determine these entitlements and their overlap. Continental shelf entitlement is separate yet complementary to delimitations. Conflicting entitlements are determined through the delimitation process. Principles of delimitations include land dominates sea, and each state controlling maritime territories opposite its coast. Natural prolongations helps identify a natural submarine frontier. The International Court suggested in Libya and Malta case that delimitations method cannot change the inherent nature of continental shelf. Only methods reflective of that inherent nature should be employed. Although UNCLOS was not enforced between the parties, the flexibility of the rule stated in Article 6 made it indistinguishable from the customary rule of maritime delimitations endorsed by Article 76 of UNCLOS. The court held that the two standards were indistinguishable. In Guinea versus Guinea-Bissau, a single line of delimitation was claimed to be applicable to the territorial sea, the EEZ, and the continental shelf alike. In Barbados versus Trinidad and Tobago, the arbitral tribunal's task was less challenging because Trinidad and Tobago accepted the single boundary delimitations for both EEZ and the continental shelf within the 200-mile area. In Ghana versus Cote d'Ivoire, ITLOS, the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, decided to use single boundary with regard to the continental shelf, EEZ, and territorial sea alike, even though the latter area is one of sovereignty, because the parties did not press the sovereignty issue. The court in Qatar versus Bahrain stated that the concept of a single maritime boundary does not come from multilateral treaty law, but rather from state practice, being the practice of states that have chosen to request a single maritime boundary of various zones without prejudice to the rights of states that have not made such a choice. In Peru versus Chile, the International Court of Justice identified the agreement reached in practice between two states to delimit the maritime boundary in the area within 80 miles from their coasts, but that agreement did not cover maritime areas beyond that limit. Thus, the court had to use equitable delimitations methods for that more distant sector. Overall, the position is that evidence of a tacit legal agreement must be compelling. The establishment of a permanent maritime boundary is a matter of grave importance, and agreement is not easily to be presumed. In Articles 76 and 83 of UNCLOS require the use of equitable criteria exactly when parties are not agreed on which factor is relevant and which one is not. On a general plane, as emphasized in Libya Malta case, the equitable task of the court is more limited than what states can do through consensual delimitations. Courts can do less to shape or modify states' rights than states themselves can do through their own mutual agreements. Maritime boundaries based on the equidistance principle are often distorted by the presence of islands or by the curvatures of the coast, and the effect of such distortions increases as one moves further out to sea. A separate issue is the presence of natural land features in the disputed waters, but visibly far away from the coast. As a starting point, there is a difference between the overall legal status of a natural feature and how it influences the delimitation's outcome. Minor features such as islets and rocks have no inherent relevance in equitable delimitations, especially when a single line is being drawn with regard to the seabed and superjacent waters. The International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, ITLAS, in a case involving Bangladesh versus Myanmar, has stated that there is no general rule determining the relevance of islands for maritime boundaries, and it depended on what the particular circumstances of the case were. In United Kingdom versus France, the tribunal refused to hold that the Eddystone Rock as a low tide elevation had the same relevance for the purposes of the delimitations of the continental shelf as it had with regard to the delimitations of the territorial sea. The matter was disposed by the French government, having accepted the relevance of the rock as a relevant circumstance, so the median line was drawn to take account of it. Islands such as Scilly Isles and Ocean got half effect in United Kingdom versus France. In Libya versus Malta, the court adjusted the provisionally drawn boundary line because Malta, as an independent state, was not supposed to receive less maritime space than it would receive had it been an island in the possessions of Italy. It would not be justified to place Malta in a worse position because of its independence. Article 76 of the UNCLOS allows coastal states to extend their jurisdiction beyond 200 nautical miles based on natural prolongations. Coastal states can establish the outer limits of the continental shelf, but must comply with international law. Scientific and technical criteria are crucial in determining if initial state determinations meet legal requirements. States must submit data to CLCS, the Commissions on the Limits of the Continental Shelf. This commissions clarifies legal terms but cannot issue recommendations in matters of disputes. Delimitations and delineations are distinct processes. This commission handles delineations beyond 200 nautical miles, while tribunals handle delimitations with neighboring countries. The commission recommendations are non-binding but challengeable. The process of the consideration of submissions can be lengthy. The Commission requires consent from all states involved in a dispute. If a state disagrees with the Commission decisions, it may set its own limits, but other states can still evaluate their lawfulness. A tribunal can adjudicate on both the state claim and the Commission's approach. It is precisely the structured approach to maritime delimitations, which consists of a multi-layer and multi-level of stages, that enables tribunals to address various equitable considerations as opposed to using any of them blanketly, as though it was a legal requirement. and discarding others. Also, owing to the intrinsic connections of equitable delimitations methods to the initial entitlements of states to the maritime areas to be delimited, the overall delimitations exercise increasingly edges closer to science than to art, to mathematics than to metaphysics. The complexity of the process is owed to the use of structured and disciplined method visible across all major tribunals jurisprudence as opposed to subjective appreciations. The high seas are open to all states for various activities. Ships on the high seas are subject to international law and the laws of their flag state. Flags of convenience allow ships to register in states with lenient requirements, often to avoid taxes. However, a genuine link between the ship and the state is required for effective jurisdiction. ITLOS and the Arbitral Tribunal emphasize the ship as a single unit. It links to the flag state's legal standing to all on board. The flag state's standing was expanded to non-crew persons as well. ITLOS judgment in Saiga case separated genuine link and effective control. Issues arise with regards to diplomatic protections and high seas ship collisions. As a general rule, no one but the flag state may exercise jurisdictions in the sense of powers of arrest or other acts of physical interference over a ship on the high seas. There are a number of cases where a warship of one state may interfere with a merchant ship of another state. For example, stateless ships. Since the high seas are open to the ships of all nations, the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council held in Asha case that it was lawful to seize a stateless ship on the high seas. Although the decision was probably correct on the facts of the case, however, Privy Council's reasoning should not be carried to its logical conclusion, as it is arbitrary confiscations or destructions of a stateless ship would entitle the national state of the ship owners to make an international claim. The right of hot pursuit allows coastal states to arrest foreign merchant ships in their waters. It prevents ships from escaping to the high seas. Under Article 111 of the UNCLOS, it outlines this right with similar rules for the Exclusive Economic Zone, the EEZ. However, it does not allow sinking pursuit vessels, and pursuit must be uninterrupted. The merchant ships on the high seas are controlled by warships of the flag state. Warships may investigate merchant ships to confirm their nationality. Under Article 110 of the UNCLOS, it supports this notion, but was interpreted strictly in Medvedev versus France. Under Article 108, the UNCLOS focuses on state cooperations for narcotic drugs traffic. The Court of Human Rights, European Court of Human Rights, in Medvedev versus France, it was not seen as sufficient international legal basis to justify what would otherwise amount to a violations of Article 5 of European Conventions on Human Rights, which prohibits arbitrary detention of individuals. Treaties often grant reciprocal power of arrest over merchant ships. The UNCLOS suggests this is now has become a customary law. The 1988 Rome Conventions, initiated by Italy, addresses unlawful acts against maritime navigations. The 2005 protocol expanded such a scope. The 1988 United Nations Convention requires state party authorizations for actions against suspected vessels. The 1995 fish war between Canada and the European Union involved Canada seizing the Spanish trawler Estai for fishing turbot in defiance of Canadian regulations. The conflict was settled by an agreement between Canada and the European Community on 20 April 1995. The Spanish trawler fishing, also known as Greenland halibut, in defiance of a 60-day moratorium imposed by Canadian conservation regulations. The vessel was only released a week later after its owners had posted a, a 500,000 bond. Piracy is addressed in Articles 100 to 101 of the UNCLOS. Pirates are considered enemies of all mankind. Warships can board suspected pirate ships on the high seas. If suspicions are justified, the ship can be seized and persons arrested. Piracy must be directed against another ship. Mutiny is not piracy under international law. Therefore, the mutineers may be arrested on the high seas only by the flag state and not by other states. Belligerent rights. In time of war, a warship belonging to a belligerent state may seize enemy merchant ships, and also, in certain circumstances, neutral merchant ships trading with the enemy. France's seizure of foreign merchant ships in the 1950s was condemned. Coastal states can seize or destroy ships to prevent pollutions, as seen in the 1967 Torrey Canyon incident. This has led to the 1969 adoptions of conventions on oil pollutions, interventions, and liability. The Torrey Canyon incident led to the adoptions in 1969 of the conventions relating to interventions on the high seas in cases of oil pollution casualties and of the conventions on civil liability for oil pollution's damage. Action authorized by the United Nations, the shipping interdictions. The United Nations may authorize actions such as shipping interdictions to enforce international peace and security. Resolutions 2749 declare the deep seabed as the common heritage of mankind. The International Seabed Authority, the ISA, controls the deep seabed and grants licenses for exploitation. Developing countries hope to benefit financially while developed countries demanded fair returns. The 1994 agreement changed the mining regime and defined activities and resources in the areas. As early as 1981, the United States passed a law authorizing the United States companies to start exploring the deep seabed. Similar laws have also been passed by several other developed states, such as France, West Germany, Italy, Japan, and the United Kingdom, and the USSR. There was an agreement between most of the states which have passed such laws that companies from one reciprocating state will not be authorized to operate in an area covered by a license issued by another reciprocating state. The law in question did not purport to create rights over any part of this deep seabed which will be exclusive, as against states which have not passed such laws. The laws were intended to apply only during the period before the entry into force of the UNCLOS. to which the legislating state is a party, and they provided that all or part of the revenue received by the government concerns from the exploitation of the seabed will be shared with developing countries or transferred to the International Seabed Authority, the ISA. In spite of this law were condemned by developing countries as violations of General Assembly Resolutions 2749